Welcome to another presentation of the Cognitive Security Institute. The views expressed by presenters are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of, or endorsement by, the Cognitive Security Institute or any affiliated organizations. Humanity stands at the threshold of an unprecedented technological revolution. Advances in AI-powered autonomous systems, direct neural interfaces, and immersive digital connectivity promise to redefine human capabilities. However, this transformation also presents profound ethical, security, and existential challenges that demand proactive and thoughtful action. The decisions we make now will shape the trajectory of our species and determine whether we thrive in this new era or falter under its weight. You may learn more about cognitive security and how to become involved in this rapidly growing community by visiting our website at cognitivesecurity.institute. If you find these talks interesting, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. We hope that you enjoy this presentation. Dr. Rand Waltzman is currently an adjunct senior information scientist at the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, California. Prior to joining Rand, he was the acting chief technology officer of the Software Engineering Institute of Carnegie Mellon University. Before that, he did a 5-year tour as a program manager in the Information Innovation Office of DARPA, where he created and managed the Social Media in Strategic Communications program and the Anomaly Detection at Multiple Scales Insider Threat Detection program. Rand joined DARPA from Lockheed Martin Advanced Technology Laboratories, where he served as chief scientist for the Applied Sciences Laboratory that specializes in advanced software techniques and the computational physics of materials. Prior to LMATL, he was an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden, where he taught and performed research in applications of machine intelligence technology to a variety of problem areas, including digital entertainment, automated reasoning and decision support, and cyber threat detection. Before his professorship, he served as a DARPA program manager, focusing on machine intelligence and image understanding. Rand has also held research positions at the University of Maryland, Technology Corporation, and the Applied Physics Laboratory of the University of Washington.
Hello, this is Dr. Matthew Canham, the Executive Director of the Cognitive Security Institute. Threats to cognitive security will pose one of the greatest challenges of this century. Dr. Rand Waltzman was one of the first to sound this alarm in 2017 when he testified to the Senate Armed Services Committee. In today's presentation to the Cognitive Security Institute, Rand again sounds the alarm about threats emerging in the metaverse. We hope that you enjoy it.
It's fun to start out with this quote by Mark Zuckerberg, and this was from Facebook Connect in 2021, and he said, as you can see here, the metaverse will feel like a hybrid of today's online social experiences, sometimes expanded into 3 dimensions or projected into the physical world. It will let you share immersive experiences with other people, even when you can't be together, and do things together you couldn't do in the physical world. Now, that's what he said. What I heard when he said that was this. So there will be massive opportunities for fraud, money laundering, child exploitation, disinformation, influence, cyber attacks, political manipulation, terrorism, and many other fun, exciting things. So he, of course, is trying to put a good face on it. And you know, all these things are fine. I mean, there's certainly lots of great things to say about the virtual or augmented reality systems, but there's also some very dark sides to it, which you know, people just haven't been willing to face up to yet. I mean, okay, that's not unreasonable since these systems aren't as ubiquitous yet as they will be. I would think in the future, but the problem is that nobody's going to worry about this stuff until it's already too late. The same thing that happened with social media in general. I mean, nobody was really concerned about the really downsides of it until it was already too late. Even though there were voices that said, you know, tried to give warnings, but well, nobody paid any attention. So we are where we are now, and I predict the same thing will happen with augmented reality systems. Nobody's going to pay any attention to the kind of thing I'm going to talk about today until it's too late. But anyway, you can say you heard it here first. And in fact, this is basically a talk that I've given 2 years ago, and nothing has changed in the last 2 years. There's been no improvement, no further work, basically not much of anything. So it's kind of sad that I could give the same talk I gave 2 years ago, and it's exactly as valid today as it was 2 years ago. So, but That's life. What can you do? All right, so to start out, immersive virtual reality, what do we really mean by that? Well, it's a communication medium that uses specialized hardware like a head-mounted display and sensory feedback like specialized audio. It creates a virtual experience that surrounds users. This is really important, that it makes the virtual world appear and feel comparable to the physical world. I mean, to the extent where you really can't tell the difference eventually. And remember, don't judge whatever you know about virtual reality environments by the headsets that exist today, because they're improving at a tremendous rate. And you know, things are going to get a lot better. They'll become more lightweight. They'll become much more usable until the technology gets to a point where the technology becomes as ubiquitous as a mobile phone, and that day will come. So it creates a virtual experience, like I was saying, that really surrounds the users, and it makes the virtual world, you know, seem like the physical world. Now, it's qualitatively different than other media, such like a mobile phone, a TV, or non-immersive video games, because it uses natural body movements to engage with a scene and receives perceptual updates to those movements in a way that's congruent to our sensory motor system, which all that basically is a fancy way of saying you feel like you're there and you feel it with your whole body. And it creates experiences that are really psychologically rich, meaningful, and importantly, often long-lasting, as in long-lasting after you take the headsets off. So there's three important constructs that are really central to understanding the psychological processes involved in a virtual reality experience. The first one is what's called presence. And presence is the psychological feeling of being there in a virtual environment. The next thing is immersion. And immersion is really how well the VR technology approximates typical human actions and behaviors. Then you have embodiment, and that's the ability for people to adopt the perspective and physicality of objects, entities, or figures in the world. Now, presence and immersion are important because they enhance the emotional intensity of an experience. So experiencing virtual technology with high degrees of fidelity often can have enhanced psychological effects. So people who feel like they're part of the virtual world tend to connect more deeply to it. Users, for example, have a sense of active presence. And this has been defined as, and I put this in quotes, the illusion of non-mediation. In other words, non-mediation meaning that you're communicating with a machine and with everybody else without any kind of interface. So then you have embodiment, which can really make people feel a range of different emotions that they might fail to experience outside of an embodied virtual experience. And make absolutely no mistake about it, these environments are all about emotional manipulation. That's the key to making all of these, well, good and bad things happen. But it's all at the bottom line, emotional manipulation. So for example, you know, embodying an animal can make somebody feel more emotionally connected to nature. Or embodiment can facilitate perspective taking that encourages people to feel closer to objects or experiences that are typically foreign and otherwise not possible in the real world for them. Like take you to places you can't really get to, or meet people who are maybe even dead. So yes, it opens up a whole different world of possibilities, and I'll talk more about that later. So taken together, the constructs of presence, immersion, and embodiment can intensify psychological effects of emotion. And like I said, emotional manipulation is really what this is all about. It makes people experience different emotions that might be difficult to evoke in the physical world. So psychological realness, that also causes immersive technology users to physiologically respond to virtual simulations in ways that are like their bodily responses to real situations. So for example, measured brain activity in MRIs has shown that when a user experiences a virtual event and subsequently recalls it, the response in the hippocampus is akin to the way one would predict the brain to respond to an actual event. Immersive technology provides a visceral experience. So things that happen there aren't physically real. If the bad guy shoots you in a bullet train, you know, you don't die in real life, but they do feel real. And those feelings can in turn have actual physical consequences. You could literally be scared to death, or at least into a heart attack, by a game that felt sufficiently real. Even if you aren't physically harmed, you will have experienced what you saw and did in virtual reality in a way that you do not on the internet as it exists today, or in non-VR type video games. It isn't simply the immersive quality that defines these experiences. It's the way it is, the way users' minds memorialize what they perceive. So memorialization is really important. There is no separation between the user and the objects of his or her interaction. And this can be useful in certain contexts, like educational or therapeutic experiences, and more problematic in other virtual experiences, like gaming that involves committing acts of violence. But today's digital media are so rich with detail, from three-dimensional graphics and personalized avatars to quality sound and more, that it's easy for the human brain to organize and store memories derived from detail-rich experiences with digital media. It really becomes difficult for the brain to distinguish between memories of physical world experiences and memories of experiences with digital media, both of which tend to be rich in detail and relatively easy to organize and store. And this finding suggests that third parties may be able to elicit false memories without the consent or mental effort of an individual. So, as my friends in the military like to say, bottom line up front, it is generally true that the success of a deception and manipulation campaign relies on the targets not realizing that they are under attack. A fully experiential environment actually provides more opportunities to disguise D&M attempts than the current information environment as it exists. A VR environment makes D&M intent harder to detect. A key, and we can't even detect this kind of intention in the social media that exists today. I mean, which is basically text-based, or you go to videos, short-form videos. It's still difficult to automatically detect intentions to deceive somebody or manipulate somebody. When you get into these kind of virtual reality environments, it's going to become infinitely more difficult, because it's then the entire environment and the way somebody interacts with it that they're experiencing, which you have to take into account in order to really understand what's going on. So a key differentiator for persuasive messaging, manipulation, and disinformation is that there's currently no way to automatically detect instances of it. So when it comes to research that needs to be done, this is a really important line of research, and I don't see really much of it happening. Current privacy and other regulatory frameworks are also really far behind technical reality and falling further behind at an accelerating rate. Content moderation, which very many people are so big on, which is a fancy way of saying censorship of one kind or another, it will look quite different in an immersive context than it does in social media and other kinds of internet-based environments. Because of the differences in the content and nature of immersive experiences, technologists and lawmakers should not presume that content moderation frameworks will function like they currently do in social media. And as we all know, they don't function that well as social media exists. And like I said, when you get into these kind of environments, things are going to get a lot more complicated. So what are the differences really? Well, exactly what is it one would want to censor? And how would that work? And maybe there will be features of neurophysiological manipulative techniques that need to be censored. Maybe what will be censored will not only be the intrinsic content, but also the way the content is conveyed. In other words, it's not only what you say, but how you say it that will need attention. Now, another thing that's really unique to these environments is the type of opportunities that it presents for biometric measurements in real time if somebody's interacting with the systems. These devices can and will in the future be able to measure multiple biometric data streams, and behavior and attitude prediction power increases when multiple biometric data streams are combined. Some examples of potential biometric data measurements include pupillometry, which is a measurement of changes in the involuntary dilation of the pupils. In that case, changes really can result from and be used to assess things like sexual interest, racial bias, schizophrenia, moral judgment, autism, depression, and so on. Then you have eye tracking. Eye tracking, well, what has visual salience to you in what you're doing? What path does your gaze take? That's very telling. Facial tracking, you can try to use facial expressions to predict your feelings. So for example, there are 7 emotions that are highly correlated with certain muscles in the face. There's anger, surprise, fear, joy, sadness, contempt, disgust. And then you have things like galvanic skin response. So how intensely do you feel an emotion? You have electroencephalography, which is like how aversive or repetitive is a particular task, how challenging is a particular cognitive task, or how attentive or distracted is a person involved. Then you have electromyography, how tense are your muscles? That can detect micro expressions, so it'll be hard for people to fake their reactions. Then you have electrocardiography. Does your pulse increase in response to a stimulus? So there are these, and there are many, many more, and there are more coming, and the sensors to measure these things are improving at fantastic rates. So again, don't judge what you can do today by what you're going to be able to do tomorrow. And tomorrow doesn't necessarily mean the far distant future. It's really, within the next few years. Then you talk about privacy violation. That's always a fun topic. The immersive technology introduces previously unforeseen risks. There are new types of privacy violations that will come from the novel capabilities of immersive technological systems to track and predict user behavior, combined with a lack of regulation in this space. You use the headset for entertainment, like watching a concert in VR or collaborating with colleagues in a virtual meeting space, or even making social connections with other avatars and admiring the virtual homes they've built. At the same time, however, the VR headset analyzes what you are engaging with and how it's making you feel. Immersive technology takes the user out of the traditional role of observer and puts them at the center of the story. And to do this, the hardware must monitor the user in very intimate and pervasive ways. So it isn't a matter of, well, are you willing to share the information? It's a matter of, well, if you want to use the system, you better be sharing the information because it relies on that for its function. So it's going to really be tremendous invasion with or without your permission, as long as you're using the system. Then we talk about psychography. So psychographics is really the study of consumers based on their activities, interests, and opinions. Excuse me. It goes beyond classifying people based on general demographic data like age, gender, or race, and it seeks to understand the cognitive factors that drive consumer behaviors. This includes emotional responses and motivations like moral, ethical, political values, and inherent attitudes, biases, and prejudices. The term psychographics refers to a quantitative method to describe and segment consumers based on psychological attributes such as behavioral preferences, personality, beliefs, opinions, interests, attitude, values, and to some extent, habits and lifestyles. Biometric psychography uses behavioral and anatomical information like pupil dilation to measure a person's reaction to stimuli over time. This can reveal both a person's physical, mental, and emotional state and the stimuli that caused him or her to enter that state. It's a combination of biometrics and psychographic information. Now, immersive technology, it really can measure biometric information and retain data far beyond the law's focus on biometric identifiers. Immersive technology is not limited to static measurements or images because sensors track how users move over time. Furthermore, it constantly records changes in the environment and how that change may impact the user's condition over time. It's a new quality of information that is comprised of the user's real identity, combined with their reactions to particular stimuli, indicating what someone uniquely may think and like and want. However, user identification is the focus of current biometric regimes, and that hardly even scratches the surface of what's possible. Most people do not understand how involuntary bodily indicators of emotional responses, mental state, or health can disclose fundamentally private information like truthfulness, inner feelings, and even sexual arousal. This information can in turn be used as a basis for influence, deception, and manipulation that is really tailored to individual targets. The current legal frameworks regarding biometrics and privacy do not reflect the development of immersive technology. And you know how slow governments move at regulations. So the technology is moving so much faster than any possibility to keep up with any kind of reasonable regulation, if you're into that. It does not consider what features are available with hardware, how those features function, and what information about users is available, and how that information could be used. Biometric data is only covered by existing law if it is for authentication purposes. This creates a huge loophole. Physiological data used to determine a person's likes, interests, and motivations rather than their identity is almost certainly not covered. And that is exactly the kind of information that is most useful for purposes of influence, manipulation, and deception. Current privacy laws covering biometric data used for identification purposes are inadequate when it comes to VR environments. So as the technical capabilities change, more omissions and gray zones in the law may become clear. For example, physiological characteristics related to locomotion can be outside of legal definitions of biometric data or biometric identifiers. And this includes things like gait tracking, where people can be identified in crowds by the way they walk. Because of the length of our bones and the idiosyncrasies of our movements, the combination of users' head tilt while in a VR or AR headset and the quality of their gestures in an immersive environment can be just as personally identifying as his or her fingerprint, retinas, or vocal patterns. This blend of data sets and development of unique identifiers was not contemplated when the current statutes were written. Now, research shows that eye contact increases the attentiveness of students. And this is just to give you an example of what happens when things that are not actually possible in the physical world suddenly become possible in the virtual world. And this is, I think, is a really fun example and has been demonstrated by experiments. So a teacher lecturing a large class can't make eye contact with every student. That's physically not possible. However, in a virtual reality environment, the software can be programmed to make the teacher appear to be making eye contact with all the students at the same time. So a physical impossibility becomes virtually possible. Now, what if instead of a teacher, there was a politician, a lobbyist, a con artist, or a terrorist recruiter attempting to manipulate an audience through deception? What if the apparent eye contact meant that the audience was more persuaded as a result? Another simple example of how you use it. Now, another fun example, if you're engaged in a virtual reality chat, facial features, expressions, gestures, bodily appearance, and many other factors can be altered by software without you knowing it. And it can be done on a one-on-one basis, even among a massive crowd of people. So this is, so this can really support well-known techniques that are designed to enhance influence. So mimicry is a great example. And this is a common trick that con artists use all the time. And this is, a one-on-one close-up con jobs. If one person mimics the body language of another in a conversation, then the person being mimicked will become more favorably disposed towards them. Now, that's done live, so it's only one-on-one. But a speaker's avatar could be made to mimic every single person in the audience. That is, and when I say audience, I mean the number of people who are in the virtual reality environment can be as many as you like. And it can be made to mimic every single person in the audience at once without anybody realizing it. In a virtual reality environment, it's easy to do this as the movements of each individual are tracked. So there's another great opportunity for a simple trick, which through time has been proven to be very effective and which can be scaled up to an arbitrary number of people, which physically, of course, like I said, isn't possible. Some other fun example. This is from a study at Stanford University. It's one of my favorites. I really like this one. If the features of a political figure could be changed even slightly to resemble each voter in turn, then that could have a significant influence on how people voted. So these experiments took pictures of study participants and real candidates in a mock-up of an election campaign. The pictures of each candidate were then morphed to resemble each participant in turn. They found, They found that if 40% of the participants' features were incorporated into a candidate's face, the participants were entirely unaware that the image had been manipulated. Yet, the blended picture significantly influenced the intended voting result in favor of the morphed candidate. Now, in their experiment, they did this, one-on-one with an actual photograph of somebody physically sitting in a room. But now imagine doing this in a virtual reality environment, right? Where you could be doing this in real time with any number of people. So, if 1 million people are watching a political speech, it could, because you could take the features of each person, blend it into the speaker separately, that each person will see separately. And you have 1 million people being manipulated by this kind of effect simultaneously. It's really slick. And you can see, here's some examples. It's very hard to tell that this has been done. So on the top row, you have in the center was a picture of Hillary Clinton as she is. And then the last row, you can see 35% subject, 65% Clinton, and it's the subject shown on the far left. So hard to see, and if you're not really paying attention, you won't get it, but you'll feel it somehow, and you'll be reacting to it. So that's one of the great things about this. It's really one-on-one, on many, on many. And the difference between one-on-one or close-up deception and manipulation and large-scale group deception and manipulation has long been recognized. It's like the difference between close-up magic and large-scale audience magic. If you've ever been to a magic show, you know what I'm talking about. But what happens when you can do close-up deception and manipulation in a group setting? For example, every member of the audience is actually hearing something different and tailored to just them, but they're still together in a group. How would individual and group dynamics interact? So this introduces an entirely new dynamic. That's an example of something which, like a type of a problem or opportunity that simply hasn't existed before. Here, another fun experiment, just to show. In the virtual world, appearance is flexible. Now, change in appearance can result in a change in behavior. And experiments show that if you increase the height of somebody's avatar by 10 centimeters, they'll win a negotiation compared to if you decrease the height of your avatar, of their avatar by 10 centimeters. Or another example is if you age a 20-year-old's avatar and then give them the opportunity to save money or to spend it frivolously, the 20-year-old will put more money in savings as opposed to go out and spend it on partying. So just by changing somebody's avatar and the way they perceive themselves outside actually changes their behavior. And this has also been shown in some very interesting experiments. Now, another recent study investigated the current use of VR technologies to help support the treatment of depression and anxiety. And this has actually become quite a bit useful in what's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And these investigations, they tried to see whether cognitive behavioral therapy is included, which is included as part of virtual reality exposure therapy. And they looked at whether the VR technologies and interventions that have been used in recent studies on depression and anxiety were helpful and really made a difference in the treatment plan. And most studies demonstrated the use of VR to be effective for supporting the treatment of anxiety or depression in a range of settings, and recommend its potential as a tool for use in clinical environment. So there are a lot of people in the psychotherapy community who are using this type of technology. Even the primitive versions of it that exist today have been shown to be very useful. One of the most interesting things is there was, some of you may feel the fact that some people in psychotherapy are starting to use microdosing of psychedelic drugs like psilocybin as part of a therapy treatment. So some guys pose the question, is it possible to achieve a similar effect in a virtual reality environment as you would get with microdosing of, say, psilocybin? So they designed this environment, they built the environment, they had several, a bunch of participants sign up and try this experiment and describe their experiences. And it turns out that, yes, it seems like you actually can replicate the same kind of experiences you get with psychedelics in the virtual reality environment, which to me at least suggests that these environments really are pretty serious. Also for use, people have been using them, psychotherapists have been using them for things like treating PTSD and other kinds of problems. But the really fun thing about it is that they can treat people for cases which to apply this kind of cognitive behavioral therapy in cases where you can't do it in the physical world. For example, take somebody who's afraid of thunderstorms. Well, part of this kind of therapy is that you expose people in a measured way to the thing that they're afraid of, that they have phobias to. So, okay, well, thunderstorms, you can't just call up thunderstorms at will arbitrarily in the physical world. However, in a virtual reality environment, you actually can. So that's just one example of where you can do things where you can't do otherwise. Now, one of the other interesting uses that people have been using these environments for is to mitigate real pain. So, for example, there have been programs for burn victims at the University of Washington. There have been pediatric patients at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. They've used it on women in labor at Cedars-Sinai. And those things indicate that virtual reality can help to mitigate pain in a very real way. The question, though, however, is if VR can mitigate real pain, it can also be used to inflict pain, physical as well as psychological. Immersive environments, they can also help people experience things that would otherwise be out of reach. And like I said, I just gave them example of like climate change. So, well, I gave an example of thunderstorms, fear of thunderstorms, but another project that was done at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute has sought to change attitude towards climate change by letting people viscerally experience the results of irreversible global warming. So, you really feel what's going on. Now, that sounds great for that problem. However, if I intend to spread disinformation regarding the imaginary horrific side effects of COVID vaccines, for example, I can just as well enable people to viscerally experiencing these horrible side effects, driving home the point in a way that I could never do in the current social media environment. So, this is like every other technology. It's a two-edged sword. The problem is nobody's paying attention. People are focused on one edge and nobody's paying attention to the other edge, and that is not going to result very well. Now, another thing, by the way, whenever I talk about here commercial applications, the same thing applies to political applications. No matter what you're doing, you're selling something. You're trying to manipulate people, you're convincing people. It's all the same. So immersive advertising, let's talk about that for a second. It takes the form of experiences, sometimes crossing multiple forms of media that users voluntarily enter into for entertainment. So VR developers are focused on blurring the line between advertising and the experiences ads promote. Virtual reality games and experiences, for example, are often advertisements themselves. What better way to make someone excited to see the next Jurassic Park film than to place them inside the adventure themselves, like you could do in a game? Of course, this applies to any type of messaging, as I said. Now, if ads use known emotional triggers to entice the viewer to watch and absorb the content, they would become effectively irresistible. Parents will generally relate to ads featuring a range of emotions around raising children, like love, frustration, and fear. Teenagers will respond to emotions of belonging or social value. Ads use virtual reactors that physically or behaviorally resemble the people one most cares about, including oneself, will also become more compelling. These speeches can soon be custom tailored to the individual emotional triggers and the social network of the target, since you have all of these ways of measuring exactly what the emotional triggers are, using all of these fantastic biometric and psychographic measurements you can get from these systems, that results will be very, very interesting and should be very frightening. Now, market research and adaptive advertising may be conducted on live XR users, and this can be done by swapping products and styles in and out of the scene in rapid succession. So if you know what A/B testing is, where you show people two different, is this version or this version, A version or B version, which do you prefer, and go on and on and on, and somebody knows they're involved in an A/B testing experiment. But in these environments, you can do A/B testing without anybody knowing you're doing it, because the idea being that is they're focused on one place, since with these biometrics, you can tell exactly what part of a scene they're focused on. You switch something in another part of the scene while they weren't looking. And when they look back, it's changed and they probably don't notice it, but you can then measure their reactions. So there's all sorts of interesting things that you can do with this type of technique. So VR supports leveraging of personal or sensitive information about a user's body, mind, preferences, and behavior in ways that are difficult for users to consent to, or even to understand or to defend against. By collecting people's sensitive information and using it to target their emotional vulnerabilities, an ad network can customize its manipulation per person and run rapid experiments on individuals, like I said in the case of the A/B testing, to optimize the results. Everyone has emotional vulnerabilities. Intimacy requires vulnerability, and these highly personalized ads are essentially playing into this false intimacy. With upcoming XR devices, we can automate and validate by data collection in the real world the search for a target's best individual emotional triggers. The biometric sensors can gather information useful for ads in ways that capitalize on our involuntary bodily reactions, like pupil dilation or skin moisture. And this includes our emotional responses to real and artificial stimuli. Now, another interesting thing is the whole concept of dark patterns, which you may have come across. The idea also of participatory disinformation, I think, is really an interesting one. In the XR world, the target will actively participate in his own deception and manipulation. The question is, how do you integrate D&M efforts into a target's regular interactions to produce participatory disinformation? Well, we can talk about disinformation as experience, the way the term ads as experience is used to refer to the integration of ads into games. What new types of dark patterns can we expect to see or try to prevent in XR environments? So you might recall that a dark pattern is a type of layout or interaction that tricks and takes advantage of the user. And these type of tricks with dark patterns are used on websites all the time and interfaces in general. Marketing models and product design are intended to communicate messages to the user and get them to use tools in particular ways. The idea is to create interfaces to encourage certain types of interactions, like making a quick purchase, enlisting business services, or buying into a certain narrative. A dark pattern happens when the designer takes advantage of human psychology or blind spots to manipulate user actions towards a desired outcome. Deception by design encourages choices, interactions that may not be in our best interest. A grocery store, for example, will usually stock impulse buys right near the cashier. These are cheap, quick items that the customer will purchase without detailed thought. For the store, impulse buys mean a little more money with each sale. And if you don't believe that, just pay attention to the checkout counter next time you're at a grocery store. Then we have darker patterns. Interesting. So iMotions, which is an interesting company, that they do studies to show how people are reacting to things like TV commercials or product placements in retail shops. They conduct these studies by hooking subjects up to a variety of biosensing devices. So how would these studies look if they were conducted in a virtual reality environment where it's possible to elicit the same kind of physical reactions to stimuli in the real world? Such studies could be used to develop dark patterns for construction of VR environments. And this could be a major extension to the already existing work on dark patterns in the context of user interface design. One thing, if you, traditionally the way this kind of thing was been done, like you want to see how people are reacting to TV commercials or pilots for TV shows or whatever it is, normally they sit somebody down in front of a TV and they, you put on some headphones, and then they show you a commercial or they show you a TV show. And periodically the show or the commercial is stopped and a question appears at the bottom of the screen and they ask you by hand to answer the question. And when you say, okay, then it continues on. And for those of you who've never done this before, it's really a lot of fun. And that's, if you ever go to Vegas, if you go to Las Vegas, yeah, there are always people set up to do that. They'll try to grab you in as a subject and say, oh, we'll give you a free dinner if you come in and do this for 20 minutes. And I've done it a few times, and it really is it's really a fun thing to do. And this iMotions company, so one of the things that they do, their business is that they say, well, okay, they tell their customers, instead of having to stop the commercial or the TV show and ask a question and have somebody stop and write it down, we can simply measure their reactions. So it's not being interpreted in any way. I can tell you exactly how they really are reacting. So this is one of the selling points, and there's all kinds of interesting applications these guys are selling. And there are a few companies now that are doing that. One of them, interestingly, was founded by Rosalind Picard, who was a professor at MIT. She's the MIT Media Lab, and she works in an area of what's called affective computing. So some of you may have never heard the term affective computing, but it's with an A. But with affective computing is all about computing with emotions in different ways, and it's been around in AI for a long time. But it's a very tiny area and has never received much attention. But I predict to you, and you can say you heard it here, that affective computing is in the years to come going to be a very, very big deal in AI. So for those of you who are looking for future career paths or future things to learn, I would highly recommend affective computing. You'll have a very bright future. Okay, so among other great advantages, lots of more fun things and exciting things happening in terrorism and violent extremism will be possible with the metaverse. It'll really open up new vulnerabilities and present novel opportunities to exploit them. The metaverse threatens to expand the capacity for online recruitment and engagement by making it easier for people to meet up. Today, some interested in hearing what, for example, the Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes has to say, might read an article about his anti-government ideology or watch a video of him speaking to followers about impending martial law. That's today, but by tomorrow, by blending artificial intelligence and augmented reality in the metaverse, Rhodes or his AI stand-in will be able to sit on a virtual park bench with any number of potential followers and entice them with visions of the future. Another interesting example is a resurrected bin Laden, who could meet with would-be followers long after he's dead in a virtual rose garden or a lecture hall. The emerging metaverse affords extremist leaders a new ability to forge and maintain virtual ideological and social communities and powerful, difficult to disrupt ways of expanding their ranks and spheres of influence. So lots of great opportunities there. I mean, some of the applications I think that are really interesting when it comes to this. Well, anyway, some of the other things you can do with the terrorism is that the metaverse really offers a new way to coordinate, plan, and execute acts of destruction across a diffuse membership. So, for example, if you want to plan an assault on the Capitol, well, with sufficient reconnaissance and information gathering, extremist leaders could create virtual environments with representations of any physical building, which would allow them to actually walk members through the routes leading to key objectives. Members could learn viable and efficient paths. They could coordinate alternative routes if some are blocked. They could establish multiple contingency plans if surprises arise. All sorts of fun and exciting things. And when executing an attack in the physical world, augmented reality objects like virtual arrows can help guide violent extremists and identify marked targets. You're wearing glasses, and the instructions, of course, are appearing around your glasses. Violent extremists can plot from their living rooms, from their basements, or from their backyards, or from the convenience of being at home. And all of this while building social connections and trust in their peers, all while appearing to others in the digital avatar form of their choosing. And when extremist leaders give orders for action in the physical world, these groups are likely to be more prepared than today's extremist groups because of their time in the metaverse. Today, in order to rehearse this kind of things, like, for example, special operations teams, they build mock-ups of the building or whatever it is they're going to be working, acting in. And, well, you have to physically build it. It's limited and it's a pain. But with this kind of environments, wow, you can really put somebody right in the environment and really rehearse the hell out of them until they're ready to act. So very nice. Last thing I'm going to talk about here is desensitizing to violence. So for our friend in Norway, you might remember Anders Breivik. He was a white supremacist who killed 77 people in 2011 in a bombing and gun rampage in Oslo, Norway. Well, it turned out that that guy had played thousands of hours of video games, including World of Warcraft and Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2, before committing the heinous acts that he did. It was almost like a desensitization thing for him, to desensitize him to taking human life. As VR games become more realistic, that desensitization effort could become more powerful. Camp Buka, for example, allows players to torture prisoners. Grand Theft Auto also includes an interactive torture scene. And one campaign within Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 calls for players to brutally massacre civilians. So people can have all sorts of experiences in these games that can prepare them for, all sorts of nefarious activities. And with that, I think I said enough to cheer you all up. And I think this is a good place to stop.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation to the Cognitive Security Institute. You may learn more about topics in cognitive security by visiting us at cognitivesecurity.institute.